Hi, everyone. We'll get started in a few minutes as people join. Give folks a few minutes. We have folks still coming in on the queue, and so we'll get started in a few minutes. Thanks for joining us. I see a few more people still coming in. So we'll probably start in just 1 minute. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you may be. We're thrilled to welcome you to the webinar about the SSRC NEH SHIP program, Sustaining Humanities Infrastructure Program today. And I'm joined by my colleague, Daniela. So Daniela, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Hello all. Yes, good morning, good afternoon, whatever it may be. Just happy to join Jason here on this, and we are both, we'll both be presenting, taking turns on the slides, and really just to try and give you an overview of the program. And obviously we'll go through that a little bit, and we'll have an opportunity for Q&A at the end.
And like Daniela, I'm a program director at the Social Science Research Council. So Daniela works on the International Dissertation Research Fellowships program, which also has a deadline, I believe, in 4 days, in case you have dissertating students who work on the humanities. And they're looking for a fellowship. And I work on a number of programs across the SSRC related to emerging technologies and democracy. So we're really thrilled to have you join us. I want to mention Bree Brinson, who is behind the scenes, and you may hear her voice later. Oh, there she is. Thank you, Bree, so much, who's helping us on this program, and will be helping monitor and manage the question and answer session at the end of our time together. So just very quickly, SSRC is an independent international nonprofit organization. We were founded in 1923, and we're located in Brooklyn, New York, but we have an international and a domestic reach. We foster innovative research, we nurture new generations of scholars, and we deepen how inquiry is practiced. Advocacy 501c3, we mobilize knowledge on important public issues, and we recognize that the humanities and social science research brings unique insights that help us learn from history and understand the present and plan for the future. So we're really thrilled to reignite our relationship with the National Endowment for the Humanities. SSRC previously partnered with NEH on a major regranting program in the 1980s and 1990s, focused on international research and humanities research. So we're thrilled that we're able to come back together again to work on sustaining humanities infrastructure program. Now we want to keep our time together focused and leave time for questions and respect your time. So I'm just going to invite you to explore our other opportunities for grants and resources at ssrc.org. I'm going to pass it to Daniela.
Great, thank you. So so I just wanted to start with a little bit really of just the overview, if you will, the mandate of the program. That obviously has everything to do with the mandate of NEH and the American Rescue Plan funding. So at core here, of course, is this is about pandemic relief for US-based humanities institutions. Apologies, we may say that a few times over the course of our brief gathering here, but we obviously choosing clarity over repetition in all of these things. As I said, it's US-based humanities organizations, specifically about seeking relief and moving forward in recovery in the wake of the pandemic. And these are awards, as you see here before you, right, are fairly broad in nature. That is, it can be people, it can be specific projects, just a range of resources to support both humanity teaching and scholarship, right? And so we, in many ways, leave it up to the imagination of those of you who would be applying to think about the ways in which this could then help your humanities-based organization, college, university, and beyond to recover from the impact of the pandemic as it has affected your humanities programming and those sorts of things. Strongly encouraging those who are also keeping in mind, if you will, the particular impact that COVID has had on vulnerable populations, people of color, women, obviously seen a great deal of discussion of that. So if you are especially focusing on that within your project, we welcome that, right? Especially focusing again on diversity, equity, inclusion. And of course, very much within that vein and beyond, welcoming applications for minority serving institutions. So that's really the overview and our core mandate of the program. And we will go on to discuss sort of other details of it as well as the application aspects of it.
So what kinds of projects can the SHIP program support? And I should say this is a series of suggestions, but it's not meant to be exhaustive. There are other kinds of activities within that broad mandate that we've set out within the RFP. But a couple of examples, because that always helps, I think, frame what you may or may not choose to do. So first of all, we know that lots of people have seen staffing at their organization, whether it be staffing in a humanities center, staffing in a department, and so forth, including students or research assistants, where their salaries may have been cut back because of COVID and restraining on funds, restrictions on funds, and so forth. And so if say you had to cut back some student workers to half time because you just didn't have the funding available, this can help you apply for funding to give them an opportunity to go back to a more full-time or more available hours. Another thing, so just staffing in general, right, across the humanities in whatever center that you may have. Another major impact, as Daniela just suggested, of the pandemic has been on research productivity and just the ability to do all the sorts of activities that are that comprise of a professor's time and staff people's time. So what we wanted to enable is departmental, college, or university-led efforts to examine and then produce concrete steps to address the disproportionate impact the pandemic has had on humanities scholars, in particular women and people of color, caregivers, and vulnerable populations. So, this might be a chance for a bunch of faculty in a department or across departments to come together and start talking about ways to rethink tenure and promotion guidelines, for example, ways for them to come together and talk about how to better support fixed term faculty and contingent faculty on their campus, all within the context, of course, of the impact that COVID had on those individuals and those groups. Again, another thing that you might want to work on is over the course of the pandemic, a lot of people moved to remote work, a lot of critical humanities projects with online resources that were essential for things like online teaching used by researchers or teachers, researchers who couldn't necessarily go to archives or some other site visit to do work, teachers who are using these materials for instruction and so forth. So you can apply to get funds to sustain and support these critical humanities projects that have been widely used in the wake of the pandemic. Again, you might think about how you combine a few of these things. So say your critical humanities project that was widely used also suffered because you had to cut back on staffing because the pandemic had its impact. So you can think about how those two kinds of projects might interrelate. And again, going back to what Daniela raised, we really want to address, we welcome projects that address inequality or reach underserved populations.
Okay, continuing on from giving again examples, in no way exhaustive, the sorts of funding opportunities, ideas here. Just a few more things there and thinking about different kinds of programming that you could be looking to build back or increase moving forward out of the pandemic. So in terms of something like curriculum, of course, there's been a great deal of work that has gone into creating online and hybrid programs, right? And are there ways to preserve this, to enhance this, to enrich this, thinking, you know, again, as we note here, sort of thinking about the resilience in humanities education, not that we are looking to be like, during the next pandemic, are we ready? I don't mean to have such a tone to it at all, but sort of thinking about what can be learned from this. What are things that happen within a humanities curriculum that turns out is really just for the general good, both in terms of, you know, specific student populations or public. So in that sort of sense, what can we do from what has been learned and the great work that has gone on in the last year and a half that could be part of this. And then moving on, sort of this sort of next bulleted item, thinking specifically here, also, of course, so we don't just mean undergraduates if you're at a college or university, but graduate students, right? So what kind of essential services programming in terms of the next generation of scholars, right? So obviously they're thinking of current humanities PhD students, right? So what kind of support can be given to PhD students in the humanities through thinking about a proposal from any of you, right? And again, happy especially to see proposals that address this within a young scholar, graduate student, thinking and the impact there, or that I should say the intertwined aspects there of diversity, equity, and inclusion too. And then also thinking about programming, of course, more broadly, humanities organizations, whether they are institutes of higher learning or not, also have a wider public audience, right? So what kind of areas there have been done? I mean, in many ways, remote work could create or could speak to and finally grab, if not give just access, right, to broader public audiences. So what there can be maintained, preserved, grown in terms of access of the humanities content to public audiences. So again, all of these are, as we said, sort of examples of the sort of funding we would be happy to see to be supported, but of course, this is in no way exhaustive list, right? That is up to all of you.
Now, I would just say, you know, as we turn to eligibility, but just if you say, you know, well, I have an idea, I'm not really sure if it fits, we'll show the email that we have again at the end of the presentation, but we just encourage you to reach out to us. We're happy to talk through ideas, you know, and discuss them in case you're not quite sure if this is the right fit for you. We can jump on a quick call or have an email exchange. In terms of eligibility, so this funding does come from the U.S. federal government. We are a re-granting organization, and I'll note that there are several other re-granting organizations as part of this program, and we'll happily share the link where you can see kind of the array of potential programs, each of which has its sort of different approach. But so you must be a US-based humanities organization, and you must be seeking or contextualizing this request within a relief or recovery framework related to COVID-19 and its impact. So that's sort of an eligibility criteria. You can be an institution of higher education or a US nonprofit with 501c3 tax exempt status. So in any of those, college, university, community college, you know, scholarly society with that's a 501c3, etc. One thing to note is that non-US entities and for-profit entities are not eligible to apply. And these are within the framework of US context. Now, when you apply, you must demonstrate that you have a record of some kind of achievement in the humanities. So this is just to say that this is a humanities focused grant. As the NEH has said many times, that if you're like, what is the humanities? The NEH has a wonderful description of what the humanities can be on their website. But I would say that at all times you should take a broad view of what the humanities might be. If you have questions about whether you fit within a series of disciplines and what have you, feel free to reach out. And again, we're emphasizing, and encouraging projects and institutions who have a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also minority serving institutions to consider applying.
And then just to specify a little more about what we can't support, won't support. So this is the flip side, if you will, of the previous slide to make it really clear. So of any foreign and or for-profit entities, and sorry in some ways for our repetition on this. We know it takes a great deal of work and effort to put together a proposal, and we really hate to have you apply having put in all that effort if you're not eligible, right? So just want to make sure that everybody listening is really clear on that before they start to put that work in, right? And of course, perhaps no surprise coming from the National Endowment of Humanities, this is really specific to work within the humanities, so work outside the humanities, including, particular art performances or something that would come under a different funding umbrella are not eligible. Clarity here, I think also, right, if your organization, your institution has received American Rescue Plans directly from the NEH in 2021. So for instance, the Humanities Organization Program, that maybe it's helpful if folks know that had a May 4th, 2021 deadline, right? If your institution received funds from that, then you are not eligible. But also to be clear, if your organization did receive a CARES Act, which was from 2020 and a different administration, you are eligible for this NEH funding. And 56 state and jurisdictional humanities council are not eligible to apply for this, right? That's again a different stream. So just want again clarity on what is eligible, but also of course what is ineligible, which sometimes is even the first step beyond that.
And I would just add, if you need clarity on whether or not you had received an ARP award or a CARES award, or if you've received other NEH funding, please reach out. We know it's complicated, and we want to make sure that we are helping you put forward the best application that you can be. So if you've received other NEH funded, you're completely eligible for these awards as well. Some grant basics. So we anticipate around 20 awards. Of course, those numbers can vary depending on number of applications, how much people request, the way that peer review goes, all those sorts of things. But we're kind of looking at about 20 potential awards based on available funding. The maximum request that you can ask for is $100,000, and that does include any indirect costs that you are requesting. Projects may begin as early as April 1, so you'll find out before that time if you've been awarded, but they must begin no later than June 1 of 2022. And this is based in part on the restrictions under the American Rescue Plan funding itself. And period projects should be no more than 12 months in duration and must conclude, and again, this is based on the requirements of NEH and the federal government, they must conclude by May 31st, 2023.
Okay, so we're going to move now into some of the specifics of the application, and we will certainly also show that application address at the end. No surprise, it is all, and it's entirely online application process. And so just highlighting a couple of things here that are a requirement. And then actually the next slide will go into greater detail specifically about the project description. So the basic application form, which would have your institutional information, contact information, right, the primary investigator for all of this. A DUNS number. So look, this might be a new thing to many of you. I mean, if you are applying, if your institution has applied and is applying for any federal contracts, essentially, this is a requirement. Your institution most likely would already have this. So I would just reach out to somebody in your institution for that information. It is also, I believe, searchable, that information, but I will hesitate. I hesitate to give too much federal guidelines. It's beyond my usual purview. But that is a requirement, and again, it's it should be readily available if your institution has ever applied for federal monies. Again, contact information, and also a short project abstract, right? That you would just fill in there. Really, obviously, sort of in some ways, an executive summary of your larger proposals plan. Within that, we also, and then in more, obviously, have these significant supplementary material, supporting documents, the full project description, no more than 5, yes, single spaced pages. Jason will go into a bit more detail on that in the next slide, so I won't go on too much there. We do require a budget and a budget narrative, right? So this is a justification for the amount you are requesting. As it's noted, it can be no more than $100,000. And you want to be clear in all of that, right? If there are staffing costs, we've made clear is allowable, sort of exactly where the staffing costs are, the number of people involved, hours, those sorts of things. If it's restoring staffing, if it's a new staffing, all of those sorts of things should be indicated. And obviously here, what you're covering in both your project description, but as well as your budget and budget narrative is that, how is this mitigating the impact, right, of the pandemic? Brief CVs for key project participants. If it's a single person and who's the key person, that would just be, again, just a short CV on this, but you are welcome, and there's space there to upload additional information for other key participants, and a letter of institutional support, right? So, that is something. There's so many different ways in which an institution could be applying in all of this, right? I mean, so within the academy, perhaps it's the literature department, right? So you need somebody that, if you will, higher up the hierarchy to acknowledge, to know, to be informed, and to lend letter of support that would have to be on institutional letterhead, right? So to know this, and perhaps this is an opportunity also to point out that if your institution as a whole, of course, is eligible, that is, they haven't received other funding, it's possible. It is possible for more than one, say, department within an institution to apply, right? So it's not as if it's like, well, we have to choose between this department or that. So just to be aware of that, especially as you go to get a letter of institutional support, that should be clear to the person doing that, so that they are not, multiple programs within a single institution are eligible. They need to be obviously quite distinct, and they have to be covering different things. But a single institution can submit more than one proposal. So that's, I think, an important thing to know. Okay. And Jason's going to go on here then with a little bit more detail, as you can see on the project description.
And I'll just say, I see some questions starting to come in. Please feel free to add your questions to the Q&A, and we'll be turning to them in just a moment, and we'll take care of those. Project description, which is the 5-page single space. So first of all, I just want to say, we are acutely aware that everybody is fairly exhausted and everybody's writing applications. So we worked really hard to actually streamline the application process as much as possible to make it as easy as possible. I would encourage you to go to apply.ssrc.org and create an account so that you can start to see the form that you'll upload everything in, just to make yourself familiar with it. The project description itself, again, you should describe what your organization's primary goal is for this grant and how it's both relevant to the projects, to the vitality, the flourishing of the humanities, why it's significant to the humanities, and the impact that COVID-19 had on the operation, and ways that this award mitigates that impact or helps you take what happened and move forward in a form of recovery. Now, if you are addressing some form of diversity, equity, inclusion in your application, in your activities, then this is you should be explicit about that component. If you're a minority serving institution, you might give a little bit of institutional background. You can, and there's a couple of different ways to think through the DEI component. You can be supporting specific students and thinking through how to support specific students or faculty. You can also be thinking about projects that have a diversity lens that help us better understand the humanities. There's a wide range of ways that you can kind of think through that component. So I encourage you to be creative there. The number of staff, so you should detail like who's involved, who's the audience, if there's external audience for the program, or if there's an internal broader audience to your activities within the institution itself, and what your plans are to use these grant funds to help extend your reach or to sustain a project or to grow as an institution in the wake of the pandemic. And then there's all the stuff that you would expect, a grant timeline. What are the activities that you're going to do? What's the work plan? And a brief moment to discuss what are your expected outcomes at the end of this grant period.
Thank you. So I'm just going to move on. Again, we're aware of time. We want to leave room for questions. So just want to give a bit of a sense about the evaluation process. So the Social Science Research Council competitions are all evaluated based on peer review. So we will have US-based scholars in the humanities reviewing these proposals, right? And we will have these for 4 general criteria that you see before you. So just intellectual merit, really the relationship of the proposal to the to advancing humanistic knowledge, and obviously within that keeping an eye on the focus, the optional focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. The alignment to COVID-19 response. I know by the time we said it at this point, this is no surprise of course, right? The proposed project, the activities, the budget, does it respond to, in fact, the upsets of the pandemic, right? That this is the key part of this. Feasibility, most generally, right? How do the proposed activities combined with methods, budget, all of this, how do these all combine to yield results, the hoped for results, the stated aims of the project, right? Is this doable? And by qualifications, really, right, to the participants, they will have listed in various ways, have the skills, the expertise, the knowledge, the training to accomplish the aims of the proposed project, right? And obviously this also goes back to like, is there a track record within the humanities overall, right? So all of these things coming together that will be evaluated by peer review. This is our, go ahead, Jason.
No, go ahead.
No, this is what you see before you here, right? These are due December 7th. Yes, 11:59 p.m. Eastern time. You will see as the next slide will give you all the link to the actual application part that is online. But just keep this in mind here. You have a bit of time, but there you go. And any questions, please reach out, as Jason said, to nehrescue@ssrc.org. Eligibility questions, confirmation, all those sorts of things, which we know are just so much easier to do far ahead so that you don't put a huge amount of time and effort into something that you might not be eligible for. So understanding if people just want confirmation of eligibility, certainly.
Great. I'm putting in the chat that I think everybody can see that the link to the application guidelines, because it's hard to scribble down off the slide. And I'm also going to put the apply portal, application portal for SSRC in the chat. And we have some questions rolling in. Let's see. So one is funding diverse humanities master's students work with community serving nonprofits an eligible activity, or are these grants more narrowly focused, available to faculty and PhD students? These grant monies are not narrowly focused to faculty and PhD students. humanities organizations are rich and diverse in many ways, and including who works at them, what audiences they serve, and the range of both faculty, of staff, and students who attend. So I would just say that the activities outlined, if you have folks who are working closely with nonprofits in the area, that in their undergraduates or graduate students or master's students, all of that seems to fall within the purview. Again, making the case for the humanities and for the relationship to the COVID-19 pandemic. Bree, what other questions do we have?
So someone asked, are re-granting projects eligible? For example, grants to PhD students whose research projects were delayed by COVID.
So re-granting specifically is not eligible in the sense that, because that would be like a nesting doll of re-granting for which is complicated for the federal government. But you can support PhD students directly. So you can say, we have X number of PhD students who need support. You just can't run, another competition for selection. You need to find another process for identifying students, so that it can't just be a re-granting program for a re-granting program, if that makes sense. Daniela, do you have anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think the pointing out the clarity of that it can't be a competition within a competition, but that doesn't mean, I mean, obviously, within your budget, right, you can specify this amount of funds to go to a graduate student to pay for remote research or something like this, right? So you can specify in that sense that could come under the rubric of a staffing, right? But you can't run a competition. You can't. We won't give you funds to then run a competition within your graduate program to figure out who should get these funds, right? So maybe I didn't know if that kind of phrasing made it also again clearer.
And again, if it's not clear, please reach out. We're happy to discuss further. What's next?
Another attendee sends their thanks, and then they ask if there is a preferred position at the university to provide the letter of institutional support.
It's a great question. Thanks. It's not required to be like the president or the provost or anything like that. What we're really looking for is it could be if the activities are appropriate to a single department, it might be a department chair or a dean of the college or someone along those lines. What I would suggest is making sure that you read, these are institutional awards. And so like if you were applying to NEH directly or to NSF or other organizations, it's good to touch base with your Office of Sponsored Research or Sponsored Programs or whatever the name of that is at your institution, just so that they're aware. They're going to have the information, like Daniela was mentioning, the DUNS number and things like that. And they may have, a way of connecting. They may say, actually, it's great that you have a letter from your department chair, but let's get one from the dean. And then, they may be a preference of theirs. But really, the letter should just state that they're aware, kind of like state what they're aware of the activities happening, that they support them. And this can be particularly important in, say, if you think back of the kinds of things that can be supported when you're maybe a department's getting together to think about how to help both tenured faculty and non-tenured track faculty think through promotion in the wake of the pandemic. It's helpful to indicate that the institution's aware that these are conversations that are being supported, that could be supported through the grant, and that they're supportive of those conversations happening. So, Danielle, anything to add there? Great. I see one good question that is, what are good tips as we prepare our application. And I think Daniela has done, I think, 100 webinars in the past couple of months herself. But I would just say, like, the first thing is, as I mentioned, is to create an account at apply.ssrc.org. That will give you a really good sense of what the application form looks like. You can get some comfort with it, so you're not like, it's not as complicated as grants.gov if you've had the pleasure of working with grants.gov, but it's helpful to be aware of what the form looks like. I would say read the guidelines, which seems like an obvious thing to say, but it's always the biggest piece of advice is to read the guidelines and then read them again, just so that you have some clarity about what you need to pull together to prepare your application. Reach out with questions. Again, you see the NEH rescue at ssrc.org email that's on the screen. Please reach out, and we'll be very responsive in answering any of your questions. Daniela or Bree, do you have other suggestions?
Yeah, I was just going to add, also in some ways very basic, but I mean, obviously clarity is always key to a good proposal, right? So don't make too many assumptions about what your reader knows of your particular plan, a project, situation, department, outreach, all those sorts of things. So clarity. And while, as I mentioned, within peer review, this doesn't mean for this program, everybody will be within the humanities discipline. Don't make too many assumptions that they will be coming from if you do represent a discipline in some manner, if it's from a disciplinary program, if it's from a department, don't make too many assumptions about that shared language. Obviously, within the humanities, there's incredible diversity and range in terms of training methodologies, impact, publics, audiences, all those things. So think about the audience for your proposal will be interdisciplinary within the humanities, and just be aware of that.
So we just got a question. Someone asks about the DUNS number. They say that they are a small program within a large university, and DUNS representatives suggested generating a new DUNS number. They ask if the eligibility is specific to the university or the DUNS number.
I mean, so you need to have a DUNS number, and you need to be a part of an eligible institution. But I think, I would say reach out to clarify, but I know that many universities can sometimes have several DUNS numbers, and you use the one that's most appropriate to the unit that might be applying. So I would encourage you to follow your university's guidelines on that. And that's a good question to reach out first to your Office of Sponsored Programs to say, hey, should we use this DUNS number or that DUNS number? But as long as it's a legit DUNS number and that you're coming from an institution that's eligible, I don't think that we have any particular concern one way or the other.
We have one more question. They ask, some of our COVID-related challenges are related to long-term problems like the shrinking academic job market affecting numbers and participation in scholarly work. Can these grants be used for programs that increase organizational capacity to address problems of this kind?
So Danielle, I mean, I'll invite you to jump in, but I think that this very much falls in, a kind of that second bullet where we're aware, that the pandemic it does have long-standing, long-term effects, and this speaks not just to the direct impact of COVID, but this question of recovery. And contextualizing it within that question of recovery, and then setting out some concrete steps of like how you will approach those questions, your organization will approach those questions, and then what impact that approach might have on addressing those challenges, I think seems perfectly in keeping with our intention with the program. But Danielle, I'd invite you to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, and I think we're all aware that there are longer term, didn't start with the pandemic, will outrun the pandemic challenges within broadly calling humanities organizations. But I do think for this particular proposal, while those problems maybe long-term sustaining there before, that I think you'd want to address this in the terms of recovering specifically from the pandemic, right? So it's not a matter of saying, and then once we have this funding, everything will be on the proper track forever and ever, right? We're all reasonable folks, but I do think that you want to be aware of the specific mandate of this program. So while the issues that you are seeing, you are acknowledging are not simply because of the pandemic, but I think in terms of this proposal, you'd want to highlight the particular impacts of the pandemic on it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of a good example. And so, for example, we know that enrollments in humanities departments have declined, right, over time. But it seems perhaps the case can be made that the pandemic has had, and austerity measures and everything else has had a significant impact on humanities departments. That seems to be the case. So, I think distinguishing sort of like mitigating those immediate challenges within the wake of COVID and the ways that might inform like how you solve those long-term challenges as well, right? I think one of the things that the pandemic has shown is the significance of the humanities in addressing challenges like the pandemic that actually make the case for the humanities. So in any event, I think, if you're kind of working through an argument or an approach and you sort of want to run it by us, probably a good way to do that is just to reach out through the email, and we're happy to discuss it in more detail. Are there any other questions? I see we're kind of at time. I don't see any more questions. Thank you for that. Those really thoughtful questions. Thank you for joining us. I'll give Daniela the last word.
Yeah, no, just to echo, we are here. If you have questions as you continue to work on these clarifications, all of those things, we invite you. And indeed, while it, to think even more broadly about different programs within institutions, if you are here as a more general institutional representative, again, we welcome multiple proposals from single institutions, organizations, and yeah, reach out to us, and good luck.
Thanks so much for coming.
Thanks, bye.